Argentina's President Javier Milei has abruptly withdrawn from the G20 summit in Johannesburg, aligning himself with US President Donald Trump's call for a boycott of the gathering. The move, which has caught diplomats off guard, marks a striking act of political solidarity between the two populist leaders and deepens divisions within the Global Economic Forum. How significant is this for the G20 grouping of countries, and is his absence really going to be felt? This is the questions we are asking to Arina Muresan, who is Postdoctoral Fellow at UNISA. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Hi, Tipisa. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off with the ripple effect and possibility thereof of Argentina's president's announcement, and should it have been expected to begin with?
So it's important to remember that this final summit of the year is very symbolic, yes, and it's a show about solidarity and good faith towards a country hosting, but there's been so much work going on that throughout the year, so many ministerial meetings across issue areas, so many partnerships being struck up, and so many working groups and engagements groups continuing the work as planned. And so when you have leaders drop out, it happens from time to time. Some choose to do so politically, some choose to do so for other practical reasons, but is it symbolically significant if Argentina will be present or not? They'll still be represented. It does not mean they are completely stepping away, but it does send a very specific message in terms of solidarity with the US.
And what about not just solidarity within the US, but also the global South? This is the moment because it's coagulating around South Africa. And South Africa has made huge concerted efforts to ensure that the issues that will come under the spotlight will be representative not only of the global South conditions and their objectives in terms of owning the conversation on the policy decisions that are made, but will it further galvanize them to actually say, as you say, because there have been myriad conversations that have been occurring throughout the year?
So when we look at the symbolic implications for what South-South cooperation narratives mean, and Argentina is incredibly special when it comes to this because Argentina actually hosted one of the very first South-South cooperation movements, and with the 1978 Buenos Aires Plan of Action. And that was a key milestone formalizing what technical cooperation meant amongst developing countries. And with South Africa choosing to orient its agenda around developing country issues, global South issues, where we talk about solidarity, equality, sustainability, these themes benefit Argentina. And yes, when you see a leader skipping an African hosted summit, it does tend to undermine this kind of narrative of the global South, where you have this focal point, and it's not supposed to be a kind of North South 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 engagement. But this is significant because South Africa is also the last country in the cycle to host from a global South perspective. And next year we go to the USA, and we expect the agenda to change significantly, to orient more towards what the G7 rhetoric has been relying on as well.
And just particularly on what you said, there is the symbolic, but there's also the substantive. There is no doubt that the global world order is facing unprecedented times, and that particularly global South countries are pushing the envelope when it comes to their collective demographic weight, because some of these issues, when we talk about inequality, when we talk about hunger, when we talk about aid cuts, they're the ones that are disproportionately impacted on. So again, I'll go back to the question that, do you think it's something that's going to highlight the urgency of being united and ensuring that these policies are enacted upon before even the United States takes over the G20 presidency? But as Minister Ntshavheni was saying earlier on, that it will still form part of the troika of leadership there.
So, what's important to remember about forums like the G20 is that there are a lot of recommendations made. And so it's really dependent on individual countries on how best they're able to domesticate this kind of G20 agenda. It really matters very little whether or not the G20 proclaims something. It's how each country is willing to and able to really take up the mantle and start to implement a number of these reforms. And yes, it is also dependent on what global discussions and global debates are able to galvanize, of course. And to some extent, we are seeing a lot of fragmentation, in how countries are able to engage. And this is part of the challenge because you see this pattern of powerful actors treating multilateral forums very instrumentally, very transactionally. They attend or they skip based on their domestic politics. And this does tend to contribute to this fragmentation in global solidarity and how we're able to move to common solutions. And you see fewer durable cross-border commitments, of course, and more bilateralism and more competing in mini coalitions and more worryingly hyper-regionalization. And so where you see South Africa, you, the practical implementation or the practical implication rather is their ability to lead multilateral agendas. Of course, they're trying to tie everyone together at the same time as with every other presidency, but of course we're in a very transactional period of international relations, and this is really pulling the agenda apart.
And to your point, we've seen Israel's Prime Minister make a rare visit to Africa. He specifically visited Zambia and the DRC. And my question then is it a true weaponization of ideology and a pushing of that common held view of dysfunction, particularly when it comes to the global south, to African countries, and will it succeed?
So we're really grappling with this ideology, this retreat from the collective problem solving. And what's interesting to see is up until this point, or not up until this point, because we've seen pressure within multilateralism for a while now. I think what's important to note is that for the longest time, you'd have leaders, for example, or the West, for example, leading on multilateralism or driving multilateralism or multilateral debates because some felt they had enough to benefit from it. And now, because of the period we find ourselves in, less and less we see this approach to how we can possibly take this collective problem solving forward, that it does no longer suggest how we're able to come to the table commonly, and that it is a shift towards more nationalist transactional diplomacy among actors. And it's not a total collapse of problem solving or the collectivity between it, but it's certainly weakening where you see this multilateral action requiring a stronger political leadership and stronger trust. And we're in a reality where we have a trust deficit. And it is very much an operational consequence. More fragmentation is more bilateral deals, like I've said, and fewer big tent compromises on global public goods.
But I also want to perhaps just delve a little bit deeper and, if not, challenge the notion of complete failure, of complete institutional weakness when we look at countries like South Africa, which obviously is bearing the brunt of this so-called corporate watchdog status it is now dealing with because of its position on Israel and what the US accuses it of. Should we be accepting this ideological view that the US and in this case Argentina are pushing?
Not at all. Look, South Africa is a committed multilateralist and finds value in organizations and institutions where it's looking for partners that try to achieve the same kinds of things. And at the same time, or at the end of the day, we're also viewing this kind of questioning of, since it's G20 just around the corner, what is the legitimacy and what is the cohesion about G20 really? And it is a complicated space, and it's important to remain committed in this sense because the current rhetoric is exposing where is the fragility, and specifically in political consensus. And it's really highlighting the limits of where multilateralism ends. And that's an important point because it speaks to multilateralism not being perfect, institutions not being perfect. And that also is an important moment because they were never perfect to begin with. And so we need to be very pragmatic and say, well, we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater at the same time. We need to work on what we can work, and rather than saying multilateral bodies, or rather than viewing this kind of pushback on multilateralism that it no longer serves, it's very important, to say that it's now time to prioritize what is flexible, what is interest driven, to view what is interest driven coalitions over what is universal, to have this very, very real understanding of who finds themselves where, and to continue to build consensus where progressively possible.
All right. I wish we could continue. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I really do thank you for your time. Arina Muresan, Postdoctoral Fellow at UNISA, speaking to us about the pulling out of Argentina from attending the G20 summit, echoing the US's sentiments, not only about the legitimacy of South Africa's holding the position, but obviously it's got its own agenda that it's set that is likely to be completely divergent to South Africa's own objectives. So it brings the time to 15 minutes to 10.